When you hear Salem Witch Trials, your mind probably jumps straight to a bunch of girls dancing in the woods, maybe some fortune telling, and just mass hysteria. But the real story? Oh, it's so much more complicated and honestly, way more chilling than that. So let's get into what was really going on. What if the whole nightmare of 1692 was less about a pact with the devil and more about a perfect storm of things going wrong all at once? We're talking political collapse, wartime trauma, and some really, really bitter local fights. Today, we're going to break down how a society that was already under incredible pressure just turned on itself, using the courts as a weapon to settle some very earthly scores. All right, first things first, we have to understand this didn't just pop up out of nowhere. The Massachusetts Bay Colony in 1692 was a place teetering right on the edge. The air was thick with fear. And you know what? It was a very real and very justified kind of fear. Okay, look at this timeline. It shows a complete and total collapse of authority. In 1684, their charter, the actual legal document their colony was built on, gets revoked by the king. Gone. Then they get a governor they all hate, this guy Sir Edmund Andros. So they overthrow him in 1689. Great, right? Well, not really, because it left them in a state of chaos with no legitimate government. And here's the kicker. When the very first accusations of witchcraft start flying, there is no real court system to handle it. The crisis literally exploded inside a power vacuum. Now, while all that political chaos is happening, the frontier is literally burning. King William's War was this incredibly brutal conflict with the French and their Native American allies. Villages were being wiped off the map. This created a wave of traumatized refugees, and this is so important. Some of the main accusers in the Salem trials, girls like Mercy Lewis, were orphans from this war. They had seen their families killed. So when they got on the stand and described being attacked by specters, their terror was real, it was authentic, and it was believable. For the Puritans, this wasn't just a physical war, it was a spiritual one. You have to get inside their heads. They truly believed that New England was land they had taken back from Satan. So their enemies on the frontier? The Native Americans, the French Catholics. To them, those weren't just political opponents, they were literally agents of the devil. So when these bizarre afflictions started happening back home in Salem Village, they didn't see it as a separate issue. They saw it as the devil opening up a second front in the exact same war, attacking them now from the inside. Okay, so we've got this colony-wide paranoia. Now let's zoom the camera in, right down to the specific village where it all went nuclear. Because the panic might have been everywhere, but the victims were chosen with chilling precision, all thanks to a nasty little civil war that was tearing Salem Village apart. See, back then, Salem was actually two different places. You had Salem Town on the coast, a rich, bustling port with connections to the wider world, and then you had Salem Village, which was inland. It was a poor, isolated farming community. And the farmers in the village really resented the wealthy merchants in the town. They felt like they were being ripped off and that their traditional way of life was under attack. This was basically a culture war pitting a new commercial world against an old agrarian one. And this big fight was perfectly mirrored by two powerhouse families right there in Salem Village. You had the Putnams, who were the leaders of that traditional farming faction. They wanted the village to be its own independent thing. And then you had the Porters, who were these wealthy entrepreneurs with business ties to the town. These two families were locked in a bitter struggle over everything: land, money, and the soul of the community. Now, this slide right here, this is basically the smoking gun. When historians mapped out who was accusing who, they found that the accusations followed these political battle lines almost perfectly. The accusers, almost all of them were connected to the Putnam family, and the people they accused, well, they were friends of the Porters, or people who were in the middle of land disputes with the Putnams, like the respected landowner Rebecca Nurse. This wasn't random hysteria. The witch hunt had become a political hit list. And the guy who lit the fuse was the village minister, Reverend Samuel Parris. He was this rigid, greedy guy who nobody really liked, and he had thrown his lot in with the Putnams. When his enemies in the village, who were aligned with the Porters, refused to pay his salary, he started preaching these furious sermons about a conspiracy of the devil working right there inside the church. So when the first strange fits and visions appeared in his own house, it was like a twisted prophecy coming true. It confirmed the story he was already telling. His political opponents were literally the devil's agents. So you've got this colony-wide fear. You've got this intense local hatred, but how does that turn into actual state-sanctioned executions? Well, for that, you need one more ingredient: a legal system that wasn't just broken, it became the very engine that drove the whole machine of destruction.
The absolute key to this whole disaster was something called spectral evidence. This is when an accuser would testify in court that the ghost or the specter of the person on trial had flown across the room and was pinching them or choking them, even while that person's physical body was sitting right there. I mean, think about that. How could you possibly prove that your ghost wasn't attacking someone? It was the perfect, airtight accusation. There was no defense.
Now, even at the time, this kind of evidence was really controversial. But the special court they set up to handle these trials, led by a guy with zero legal training, mind you, made a fatal decision. They decided, as a matter of theology, that the devil could not impersonate an innocent person. So if an accuser said they saw your specter attacking them, that was it. It was considered absolute proof that you had signed a pact with the devil. The accusation by itself was the evidence of guilt.
And this created a truly twisted and deadly system. Here's how it worked. If you were accused and you insisted you were innocent, you'd be tried, found guilty based on spectral evidence, and hanged. But, and this is the diabolical part, if you confessed to being a witch and named other people as witches, your life would be spared. This system guaranteed the panic would spread like wildfire. It literally rewarded people for lying and accusing their neighbors, creating a constant supply of new victims. And the final human cost of this total failure of government, religion, and law was this number: 20 people. 19 were hanged, and one elderly man was pressed to death with stones, all for a crime that never even happened. Now, over the years, you've probably heard a scientific theory that tries to explain all this away. It's a really popular one. The idea that maybe the accusers were just hallucinating because they ate some rye bread contaminated with a fungus called ergot. As neat and tidy as that theory sounds, historians have pretty much torn it apart. For one thing, if it was tainted food, why did it only affect a few teenage girls in a house while their parents and siblings who ate the exact same bread were perfectly fine? Also, the records don't mention key physical symptoms of ergot poisoning, like vomiting. And maybe most importantly, the girls' visions weren't just random LSD-like hallucinations. They were telling coherent stories, full of Puritan theology. The fits were just too convenient, too targeted, and way too political to be caused by moldy bread. Eventually, the madness burned itself out. It stopped when the governor's own wife was accused, which forced him to finally step in and ban spectral evidence. But the shadow of Salem, well, it stretches far beyond 1692, and it shaped America in ways we can still feel right now. Yet once spectral evidence was thrown out of court, the whole thing collapsed. The new courts acquitted almost everybody. In the years that followed, you started to see this slow, painful reckoning. Jurors and even one of the judges wrote public apologies. The colony began the process of clearing the victims' names and even paying damages to their families. But Salem's most enduring legacy is as a metaphor. In the 1950s, right in the middle of the Red Scare, a playwright named Arthur Miller wrote his masterpiece, The Crucible. He saw a terrifying parallel between the hunt for witches in colonial Massachusetts and Senator McCarthy's hunt for communists in Washington. In both cases, you had baseless accusations, you had public panic, and you had intense pressure to save yourself by naming names. Miller's play is the reason why the term witch hunt is permanently burned into our political vocabulary. And here's why all this still matters so much. The memory of what went wrong in Salem served as a powerful, hard-learned lesson for America's founders. The abuses of that court, the lack of lawyers, the acceptance of invisible evidence, the assumption of guilt, it created a deep fear of unchecked government power. And that fear directly influenced the safeguards they wrote into the Bill of Rights, like your right to confront your accuser and the absolute bedrock of our legal system, that you are innocent until proven guilty. So in the end, Salem wasn't just some weird, superstitious fluke. It was a terrifying case study of how a society under extreme stress, from war, from political chaos, from economic anxiety, can be turned against itself. It is a timeless and, frankly, a terrifying warning about what happens when fear gets weaponized, and it leaves us with a critical question we always need to be asking. When that toxic mix of fear and politics starts brewing again, who becomes the next witch?